Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Pearson Center. So a lot of you have heard that we're right in the middle of our Change Conference, and today our subject is energy policy and the rebuilding of the Canadian economy. Now look at these two fine gentlemen that we've got online with us so far. We've got Brain Gallant, the 33rd Premier of New Brunswick. We're delighted, enchanté, et bienvenue, Brian, à notre centre. And especially James Sconiak representing Bruce Power, who's already on the line with us. James, we're delighted that you are one of our biggest sponsors for this conference, so we're delighted that you're here. Now, several of us, actually probably most of us, have joined in today because we're going to meet Minister Seamus O'Regan. And we have to say at the front end that he's being a little bit delayed. This happens when you're doing live with ministers. So clearly there's a meeting happening in Ottawa that is trumping our meeting just for a few extra minutes, but we're going to get started anyway because we've got a few housekeeping duties to do. And then I also put Brian on notice that given your history, Brian, in government and the discussion about energy policy post this pandemic, our priorities for rebuilding an economy really could look quite a bit different from what we may have been talking about even a year ago. So let me just give you a few interesting things. First of all, we've been holding many webinars as a center right through this pandemic. And amazingly, we've had thousands of people participating and then sending others to our website to pick up old podcasts of work that we've already been doing and that they may have missed as live webinars. So we're getting really good take up on our topic areas, and we're finding probably we're hitting the right pulse on what people want to hear about. So the focus of this conference, our Change Conference, is simple. With everything that's changing so fast, how do we plan for the long term? Who can we bring together as a center to have the discussion that governments and authorities need to hear as they go about developing really good policy? That's the role of the Pearson Center, and we're delighted to have the types of folks like you see on the screen with me today helping us in that journey. I want to recognize that the Pearson Center is headquartered on the traditional lands of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and that our speakers and audience come from traditional Indigenous lands across Turtle Island. I also want to take a moment to thank our sponsors that supported. I just mentioned James Sconiak, all of Bruce Power. You guys have been terrific sponsors of the Pearson Center. We have gold sponsors that are CN, Canadian National, the Hill Times, and a special welcome to the Vancouver Fraser Port Authority. This is their first time as sponsors with the Pearson, so welcome to our brand new sponsor. And I have to mention sustaining sponsors. So that is individuals and groups that come and help us all year long with our activity, the Canada's Building Trades Unions and the International Association of Firefighters. So thanks to all of you. I want you to see the pearsoncenter.ca. Go have a look at the things you do. You see the other webinars that have been performed and you get to learn. Our format today is going to be as follows. We'll have that discussion. And keeping in mind the availability of the minister, we're probably going to go a little past the 3:30 mark because we're starting with him a bit later. But we're also going to have the question box active so you can send your questions in. And we're saying we're going to end at 3:30, probably a little bit later. And then for the sake of all the Newfoundlanders on the line, we may go past 5 p.m. That's Newfoundland time. So our moderator today is Brain Gallant. Brian, you're a gem for all the work that you've done with the center, so we really appreciate it. Many of you will know him as the 33rd Premier of New Brunswick. You did just a magnificent job while you were there, and we're taking full advantage of all the knowledge that you're bringing to the Pearson Center. So welcome, Brian, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Sandra. Merci mille une fois à vous tous et toutes d'être parmi nous. Thank you to everyone joining us. Apologies again that we may be a little bit late getting going, but as you can see, we have another screen that has sort of opened up, so hopefully the minister will be able to join us soon. I just want to thank Sandra, one of the co-chairs as well, JP Gladu as well as a co-chair of this conference, and I'm very pleased to be a part of it. And a big thank you to James and Bruce Power for their involvement and their sponsoring of the event. I want to go through a couple quick housekeeping items before we were able to tap in with the minister and get the interview and the discussion going. So we want to hear from you. If you have a question, you can insert it into the chat here. We would love to hear your questions. So we'd say probably about 30 minutes in, 35 minutes in, give or take. we will try to get some of your questions in to the minister. We obviously want to hear as much from you as we do from the minister, because I know a lot of the people listening are people that are very keen to discuss the role energy and natural resources can play in rebuilding Canada as we hopefully soon start to be able to say we're post-pandemic. As the minister is setting up there, also just want to sort of let you know that we are going to be covering a few different topics. Of course, rebuilding. Also want to talk about the very ambitious and important goal of getting to net zero that the federal government has committed to, even more so recently at the end of 2020, as you would have seen for those that have been following, with the introduction of an act to get there by 2050. And I just want to quickly say, as I see the minister's pretty settled in there, I just want to quickly say as well that tonight there's another event that we hope that you'll tune into. At 7 p.m. Eastern, it is the all-party panel with Senator Francis Lankin and MPs Ruby Sahota, Karen Vecchio, Lindsay Matheson, and moderator Indira Naidu-Harris. So on that note, I'm going to pass it over to James to introduce the minister.
Great, thanks very much, Brian and Sandra, and as always, really appreciate the opportunity to have Bruce Power involved in these conversations, and it's my honor to introduce the minister. You want to hear from me or from him and not me, so I'm not going to take a long time introducing him. I mean, Minister O'Regan is a well-known Canadian prior to his entry into public service, and very well known to Canadians over many years. One of the reasons why I think it's very exciting to have the minister with us is over the course of the coming months and years, we have some very important business ahead of us as Canadians. If we are going to be a net zero country by 2050, we can't achieve net zero without a very ambitious and close interaction with Canada's energy sector. And so I always say that there's many challenges in Canada's energy sector, but there's also many opportunities in Canada's energy sector. And this minister is the first minister to embrace what I would call a diverse portfolio of energy sources that balances getting to net zero by 2050, but also balances the needs of communities across Canada from all parts of the country that rely on our energy sector for good jobs that fuel the economies and the livelihoods of people in our communities. I can tell you, I don't want to make this about nuclear power today because nuclear is one of many electricity sources here in Canada. But what I would say is this is a minister that has been very supportive of our nuclear industry, but also a minister that recognizes the importance of balance in all of these decisions. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Thank you, Minister O'Regan. And I say this to every elected official, especially during the pandemic. Public service at the best of times can be a challenge, and that's what our elected officials sign up for, and whether they know it or not at the time. But in particular during a pandemic and the challenges we've had, public service is really critical at this time as Canadians, and we're all Canadians first. And I want to thank the minister for his public service, for the sacrifices that he's making to protect people's lives in this pandemic and our livelihoods. So over to you, Minister.
That's quite an introduction. Thanks very much. Can you see me? Can you hear me?
We're good. Excellent.
Okay. First of all, my humble apologies for being late. I was literally in a Zoom meeting with the Prime Minister with some very important stakeholders, and if it's any consolation, it's equally as frustrating in a Zoom meeting with the PM as it was when anybody else trying to wave and say, I really have to go. I have to go. So anyway, eventually got the message through, and here I am. But my apologies for being late. I just want to thank the Pearson Center for organizing this, for kicking this off. It's an all-star lineup of speakers that you have over the next few weeks, and I know including some of my colleagues. And I think your focus couldn't be any more timely. As James said, I mean, to say it's been a challenging year would be an understatement. It has been a year where everything changed. How we worked, where we worked, how we interact. Change has been more pronounced in some places than on others. And in Labrador, in my province, it's been scary, not just because of COVID, but people in Labrador have experienced a winter unlike any that they can remember. in Inuit and Innu communities in Labrador, which 200 plus kilometers from where I grew up in Happy Valley Goose Bay, people are experiencing things that their elders never did. You're talking about average temperatures 10 degrees higher than normal in the height of winter. I know this place. That's alarming. It's happening very quickly, and it's dangerous, especially for Inuit who have to, they depend on thick ice to move around, to hunt, to fish, to travel from community to community. And the ice coverage is melting faster in Labrador than anywhere else in Canada, and in Canada, in the Arctic, twice as fast as the rest of the planet. In places where spring sea ice would normally be about 1 meter thick, this year you're seeing about 1 foot thick. So this is timely. The theme of this conference, planning for an unpredictable future, accounting for the reality that the world is changing. It could not be more clear. Climate change is threatening the survival of our communities. It is forcing us to change with it. It is an existential threat. So it is up to us to act. The need to achieve net zero emissions did not end when the global pandemic began, and the urgency will only intensify whenever we finally get COVID-19 in a rearview mirror. And it's not just me or the government saying that. Markets are saying that. And they're saying it the best way they know how to. They're moving. Investors around the world are making very clear choices. They are putting their money into businesses, industries, and jurisdictions that are taking meaningful climate action, and they are divesting from those that, in their view, are not. Now, the good news is Canada is very well positioned. Not to oversimplify, but as my late friend Jim Prentice said, energy is our family business. This is something we're really good at, and we have been blessed with world-class energy assets to go with it. I mean, Canada is the 4th largest producer of oil and gas in the world. Not necessarily how we see ourselves, depending on what part of the country you're from. If you're from Alberta, Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and Labrador, that is how you see it. But for much of the rest of the country, it's not. But it is the biggest part of our economy. And what that means is we have hundreds of thousands of workers who know how to build energy infrastructure, and lots of it. Engineers, trades workers, scientists, investors, the people who figured out how to pull oil out of sand in Alberta and Saskatchewan, and how to get it out of the North Atlantic off of Newfoundland, which the president of ExxonMobil Canada has told me is the harshest environment that his company operates in the world. Well, the people who did that are the same people who will build our low emissions energy future. They are the same people who will build renewables. They are the same people who will help us meet our targets. But here's the thing. We are determined to leave no energy worker or energy producing region behind, like Newfoundland, Labrador, or Alberta, or Saskatchewan. And I'm sure many of you do too, we have friends and neighbors who work in this industry. So the future we build has to be inclusive. We need not only to build back better, but we need to build back smarter. En renforçant notre plan climatique avec 15 milliards de dollars et 64 mesures pour atteindre la carboneutralité d'ici 2050, ou en mettant un prix sur le carbone, ou en élaborant des stratégies pour devenir des leaders dans les domaines de l'hydrogène, des petits réacteurs modulaires et des minéraux critiques. Making it easier for Canadians to drive electric, improving the energy efficiency of our homes, engaging with Indigenous communities like we've never done before, advancing reconciliation, giving everyone access to economic opportunities. And an example is a recent investment in the Clark Lake Geothermal Development Project, which is supporting Fort Nelson First Nation in northeastern BC. Wholly Indigenous-led and owned project, repurposing old gas fields and rehiring oil and gas workers to use their skills to produce renewable, non-emitting, reliable energy. Just yesterday, actually, we announced $23 million in support of the ZB development, which is Ottawa-Gatineau's first net zero community. And it uses the Ottawa River for cooling and excess heat from the paper mill next door for heating, all without emitting a thing. So today, the real question is, I think for governments, it shouldn't be, what worked in the past and how you reproduce it, but what's required for the future and how do we create it? That's how you deal with challenging times. Not trying to predict the future, building that. And in my mind, that means doubling down on what I see as our common mission, which is net zero emissions by 2050, prosperous economy that creates, in the words of President Biden, jobs, 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 and a low emissions future that leaves no one behind. That is a lot. It is ambitious, but we are Canada, and that is what we do. So, Brian, I'm in your hands.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. Thank you so much, Minister. We really appreciate you joining us, especially given what you had to work on just before the call. And
You've probably been there, Brian, and first ministers meetings or something when you really have to get up from the table, but you want to make sure that they know it's for a good reason. So yes.
Yeah, it can get awkward. There's no question. And as you mentioned, we're all living it these days to sort of get somebody's attention on Zoom or Teams or whatever it might be. I'm really happy you're here, obviously as an Atlantic Canadian, but also just because I was going to have to fill in a little bit for you if you were delayed a bit more. Sandra Pupatel was going to ask me questions, which would have I think been a very difficult Thursday
I'm
for
watching
me.
you guys, and I'm thinking it brought me right back to Canada 8 when we told at the last minute the guest isn't there, and I had Bev Thompson and Marcy Ian and Jeff Hutchison to fill the time. You had Sandra, JP. Anyway, thanks very much.
Yeah, no, it's all good. Thank you very much for joining us. So let's dive into it, because I know people listening really want to hear you unpack a little bit what you said. I mean, thank you for the opening remarks, and I think it's very much in line with what a lot of people want to hear a little bit more about. So maybe let's start off with a very kind of general question, but obviously with the theme of today's talk. In your view and in the government's view, what role will energy and natural resources play in rebuilding the Canadian economy post-pandemic?
The good news is I can almost use the present tense for this, Brian. We're doing it. Natural resources are leading the country in this recovery already. We're seeing a rebound in oil prices. We're seeing new attention and real investment in renewables. We're seeing, lumber prices are at great highs. Our mining industry has gone, actually through the pandemic full steam ahead. They took some precautions very early on. They were really smart about it. Proud to say too, they worked hand in glove with First Nations, Inuit, Métis workers right across the country who were affected by these mines, making sure that their communities were protected. So the leadership has been shown by our natural resources industry right through this. Very proud of that. But I was alluding to something else. We're also just seeing significant and serious investment in the direction we need to go in. Carbon capture, for instance, which is going to be essential, particularly for our oil and gas industry. We're seeing the industry, and we're seeing investment reducing emissions seriously. I mean, if you were to ask me what has impressed me most, I guess, is just over the course of the past year has been the power and the speed of the market when it makes up its mind it wants to do something. And we are never going to be able to achieve our goals with just public investment. I was in Berlin. I was here in this room. I travel all over the world from my boardroom here in my office in St. John's. Jim Carr and Amarjeet Sohi and Ralph Goodale told me when I got this position, they said, this is going to be different from Indigenous Services and Veterans Affairs cabinet positions I held before. You're not going to be going to, smaller communities across the country, which I always loved because I grew up in a small community in Labrador. But you're going to be going to Abu Dhabi and Santiago and Paris and Vienna, promoting Canada's natural resource sector. And the joke is I have attended all those meetings from right here, but when I look back at John Kerry, what he said in Berlin from this room, that there was no way that the public sector was going to be able to do everything that we need to do to meet our Paris targets. It has to be the market. It has to be private capital and investment. I found it astonishing how quickly it has moved during the course of the pandemic. What has added accelerant to that has been a change in administrations in the United States, where suddenly, we would be battling with keeping the words climate change in a communique between the Prime Minister and the President, the former President. And now it's the headline item. What are you doing about climate change? This is not just a president, but an administration that is extremely focused on this, that is spending money in the trillions, looking towards climate change reduction. I mean, everything they're doing, and they are looking at through that lens. I have a colleague now and as Secretary of Energy in the U.S. who is committed to renewables, a former governor of Michigan, Jennifer Granholm, extremely impressive. And I'm not just saying that because her mother's from Newfoundland. I'm saying it because our first binational is going to be, our first binational meeting will be here in Newfoundland, by the way, mark my words.
Excellent.
But it's moved so quickly. It's moved in the right direction, but it means it's challenging for our businesses to keep up. And it's challenging for the government, I think, to lead the way and make sure that we're at a level playing field, not just with the Americans, but with Europeans, South Koreans, Japanese, in all sorts of present markets, but also new and emerging markets like hydrogen.
It's fascinating, and it's no question that it's pretty clear that the Biden administration has brought a new tone from our American colleagues with regards to a few matters, but especially climate change. And certainly your government has doubled down on its commitment, especially recently with the introduction of the Canadian Net Zero Emissions Accountability Act. Why is this important, and why should Canadians think this is important? Why is this a priority? And maybe sprinkled in there, given the acute challenges of the pandemic, what would you say to try to make sure that this is still on people's radar, obviously, as we all look to hopefully, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, a post-pandemic sooner than later, fingers crossed, and the role in which we need to ensure that getting to net zero will play?
Brian, I would say this is no longer a marginal issue. It's no longer an aspirational issue. It's no longer an issue that we will get to. For all the reasons that I cited about investment, about the markets, and about particularly President Biden's agenda and his administration's agenda, this is about jobs. This is about competitiveness. This is about a renewed economic strategy for the country. This is not a go hug a tree plan. This is our climate plan is a $15 billion investment in jobs across the country. And in new and emerging stuff, clean fuels is something that may not figure on people's radar, but what I like about it, I'm a practical guy. You're the same, Brian, you're from New Brunswick. I mean, I'm from Newfoundland. I often say we can't afford ideology out here. You take the world as it is. Between growing up in St. John's and in Labrador, you grew up to be a very practical man. So I'm a practical man. Clean fuels is something that basically we're able to take existing infrastructure and the fuel that exists and the service stations that exist and the motors that exist, but we're able to significantly reduce GHGs in fuels that we know and fuels that we use. And that's by, we could be using all sorts of feedstocks, whether it be from, it could be forest waste, it could be canola stalks, but it's happening. We're working on it, and we want to greatly expand that. So it's not as catchy and maybe as revolutionary, but it's stuff that we can do now that reduces emissions. So it's important, and also preferably with their clean fuel standard, being having altered those regulations to make them medium and long term more competitive. It gives, I'm getting ahead of myself, but if you look at the Americans right now, one of the most effective lobbies in Washington is the farm lobby. They have been, working, the president and this administration to make sure that clean fuels enters into this. We've got a clean fuel standard. The Americans have very quickly started retooling some of their refineries to reflect our clean fuel standard to sell back to us. I mean, they move fast. I give them a lot of credit. So that's kind of what we're up against. But you look at hydrogen, which they are also interested in. The Europeans are extremely interested in. Had a great meeting about 2-3 weeks ago with the senior German minister involved, the Minister of Economy and Environment. And so we're looking at significant investments in Alberta's industrial heartland, north of Edmonton. Our hydrogen strategy is deliberately national in that you look at deriving it from natural gas, where it's plentiful, infrastructure that's built out in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but in provinces like mine, where, as you know, we have quite a bit of hydroelectricity, and in Quebec and in British Columbia, we can start looking at making green hydrogen there. And we want to make sure that we get that price point down, that we can be using it together ourselves, but we can also start using it. We can also start selling it to the world. And hydrogen is actually something that because of the infrastructure and because of the expertise and the experience of our workers, I think that we can really break through in that market and potentially lead it. And then the other example, just as things that are on the horizon, geothermal, as I said, and geothermal, the great thing about it is it's what oil and gas workers do best. They can drill, but they're not drilling necessarily for oil here. They're tapping into the extreme heat deep underground. And solar and wind is happening right across this country. In Vulcan, Alberta, they're building what will be the country's biggest solar farm, 1.5 million panels. Vulcan. And Vulcan again wants to build a massive wind farm, 83 turbines over something like 9,700 hectares, and they're already creating hundreds of jobs. Our challenge is just to make sure, as I made the point, that we don't leave. There can be no region left behind in this country. And we certainly can't afford to lose workers, because the same people who built our oil and gas industry and our natural resource industries in this country in general are the same people we're going to need to lower emissions. We need them. It's as simple as that.
Very interesting. One thing maybe I'd ask you to dive in a little bit more into, what role do you see the quest of getting to net zero with regards to transportation? What can we do there as a country? And electric vehicles obviously come to mind. What can we do to incent and encourage more Canadians to opt for that? Is public transportation a big part of the answer? How do you see our approach with regards to transportation, given that our country so of course sparse, relatively speaking, which coming from Newfoundland and Labrador and coming from New Brunswick, we know all about.
That's right. About a quarter of GHG emissions in this country come from transportation, second highest in the country, second highest sector. So yeah, we have to do something about that. I think there's a great appetite for it, which is the good news. On EVs, we're building charging stations right across the country. We've built over 3,000 charging stations, so you can drive officially now from St. John's to Victoria in an electric car. We're using their different tiers of charging, and most of us know this, which is our phones. Some charge faster than others. We want to make sure that we have the fastest, because there's range anxiety, but there's also irritation from people. If you got to stop and it's going to take you an hour, to refuel or recharge, that's going to cause problems. So we want to make sure that we get rid of range anxiety, that we increase range, and that the time that it takes to charge your vehicles, very fast. I think, frankly, most of us are in the habit of charging our phones at night before we go to bed, and I think for hopefully many in the years ahead, it will, you'll just charge your car. The other thing is that if you've ever driven in an EV, they are amazing. Like, they're fun to drive. They're incredible. I have never been in a vehicle like it. So there's that incentive. But the big disincentive is price right now. It's still a big issue. And so, we put in incentives, and we will continue to put incentives in place that allow people, that put it within the range of people's affordability. But, that's where our investments in transit come in as well, to give people those options. But there are other areas that you may not think of. And, you look at the Ever Given, I think the large, that huge monster container vessel that clogged up the Suez. What I didn't know, and I only found out later, and I'm thinking of the 270 plus container ships that were backed up on either end, I believe, of the Suez, while this one clogged it up. Each one of those big vessels, it pollutes the equivalent of 50 million cars a year. That is an astounding statistic. We've already started some investments there, but how can we reduce, because they're burning bunker oil, which is like the last residual of oil after you refined for gasoline and diesel. This is what's left. It's pretty harsh stuff. It's what most ships run on. How can we change that? And can we leapfrog in some markets, perhaps in our own, so that we have ships that are fueled by hydrogen and zero emitting? Is that possible? That we're looking at that. We're making significant investments in it, not just on the West Coast, but on the East Coast as well.
Well, happy to hear that last part. That's for sure. Another element that I think a lot of people listening would be curious to get your views on. In the federal government's view and in your view, what is the future of nuclear energy and SMRs, given the goal of net zero by 2050, and of course, that these would be non-emitting sources of energy?
Well, we just made significant investments in your province. There's $50 million. There's a company there, Moltex, that is commercializing a molten salt reactor and a spent fuel recycling facility, which basically means they not only would they produce a minimal amount of nuclear waste, but they will be able to recycle it, which is astounding, because that's obviously a big concern for a lot of people on nuclear is waste and waste storage. SMRs, for those who aren't familiar, small modular reactors, picture them perhaps about the size of, a container, transport container, like the ones that I was just talking about go on large vessels. They're portable and they're nimble, and we may be able to use them in areas that you wouldn't have been able to use them before. This, I would say, nuclear and the SMR field, it's more of a medium long-term play, but it's immediate, and then we got to do the groundwork now. So what I've been taken by on nuclear is that we're really good at it in Canada. We're very good at it, best in the world, tier one. Our regulatory regime is one that the rest of the world looks to. We have the raw materials. It would be foolhardy, in my mind, for us to turn our backs on it, especially when you look at the baseload power that it provides Ontario. We're going to need baseload power as we accelerate the deployment of renewables like wind and like solar. There's no question. Renewables are not only attractive because they're zero emitting, but also because they're cheap. The cheapest form of power you can find. You need to couple that though with the reliability that people need. So that's, in our mind, that's where nuclear comes in, because it doesn't produce emissions. And that was something that we've always known about nuclear, but it definitely takes on that is a more urgent advantage now than we realized before, because of our need to limit and to reduce our GHG emissions. So we're good at it, and we have been funding these SMR terrestrial energies, another one in Ontario for 20 million that we're investing in. We would be foolish to turn our backs on it. It could provide us the power that we need in order to reach 2050.
Thank you, Minister. You mentioned in your opening remarks the fact that Canada is the fourth largest producer of oil. There's no question that the discussion over the last few weeks, months, some will argue years, with regards to that industry has certainly sort of looked to pipeline infrastructure. So whether it's for oil or gas, there's a lot of people that would say investing in infrastructure needs to be a big part of rebuilding the economy in Canada and across the globe, as we can see, and you referenced the Biden administration wanting to commit $2 trillion to infrastructure investments. So when we think of some of the infrastructure pipelines that are being discussed in Canada, discussed as well with the U.S., Line 5, Trans Mountain, how do you sort of balance the opposition that these projects would be facing with the economic opportunities that they could create, and of course in some case maybe geopolitical tensions with the U.S. So how do you balance all this, and where do you see it all going?
It's this stuff that keeps me up at night. How do you approach it? Delicately, but with ambition. Look, first of all, I look back on one of the first major speeches that I gave when I took on this portfolio, and it was to Globe, which is the biggest clean tech conference in North America, Vancouver, every year. And what I said to them in my maiden speech was, we're talking about net zero here. We will never get to net zero without Alberta. We will never get to net zero without Saskatchewan, without Newfoundland and Labrador. We will never get to net zero without oil, is the bottom line. About 70–80% of our clean tech investments, about $1 billion a year, are from the oil and gas sector. But the bottom line is, it is such a massive part of the Canadian economy. And I don't think some people, as I said earlier, appreciate that fact. And others think it's some sort of kind of marginal thing or an irritation. It is real. And how we deal with the industry is real. How the industry deals with itself is something that they are coping with. But we all know that eliminating emissions is real. Achieving net zero is real. And the day after I gave that speech, I went to Calgary. We co-hosted an innovation summit with the Alberta government. I was sitting there with the energy minister for Alberta, Sonia Savage. And I said the inverse of what I had said in Vancouver the day before. Which is we won't have a prosperous economy or a prosperous oil and gas industry without net zero. The concern that we could see was that in places where they make these big financial investment decisions, reinsurers, big money houses, you know, in London, New York, Zurich, wherever, the nightmare scenario for Canada is that you have a portfolio manager sitting at the end of the table who just, you know, looks out at his junior analysts and says, what are we doing about net zero? What are we doing about combating climate change? And somebody just says, we're writing off Canadian. That was happening. You know, when I spoke, it was, I think, probably a week after BlackRock had divested itself from the oil patch. And it has accumulated ever since. So, you know, it's an issue. We have to demonstrate that we take this seriously. You know, on the upside, our ESG standards are world renowned, and markets know that. What they want to see is a very real, again, concerted effort and effective effort at lowering those emissions. Again, the good news is that the industry is responding. We're working with the Alberta government and industry on things like carbon capture, on you know, things that we can do now while keeping our economy motoring along. And the Minister of Environment, Minister Wilkinson, and I are of like mind on this, on most things, to be honest, which is the point here is not to, you know, target or vilify industry. It is to lower emissions, full stop. It is to lower emissions. Now, in order to do that, you have to deal with the, you know, with oil and gas, because it is such a big part of our total emissions portfolio. But you know, but it is such a big part of our economy that we have to deal with it head on. It's not something you can put on one side. It is something that you have to deal with head on. It is how we get our energy. It does run a substantial portion of our economy. But we have to be realistic, but we have to be ambitious. Keystone XL, you know, I'll let you know, you talk about pipelines, and that was something that we obviously went through the day of the swearing in of the president. You know, that shortly afterwards, mere hours after he was sworn in, he rescinded the license on Keystone. We had worked hand in glove with the Alberta government from very early on in the campaign, when we could see that this would be an issue. We worked hand in glove on the ground with James Rashad, who's Alberta's envoy in Washington, with our embassy. Everybody worked hand in glove to make the case. It was a good case on Keystone XL. And I say that because what we had was a pipeline that would be net zero in its operations. That you know, pumping stations will be powered by wind and solar. That they had begun substantial and real dialogue with First Nations and Métis communities on our side of the border and on their side of the border, but also, you know, they were working with unions in a substantial way and had the unions on side on both sides of the border. They had, you know, I was proud to represent that project. It is not happening now. Now we've got, you know, Line 5, which is an operational existing pipeline. We have to maintain Canada's energy security as we go through, you know, this period of lowering emissions. I hesitate to say transition, only because I just think there are hundreds of thousands of people, including tens of thousands of people in my neck of the woods here, of families who depend on the oil and gas industry, who have got enough going on with a pandemic and with the economy in the state that it's in. They don't need to hear about some impending transition. What it is it's retooling people to make sure that they're the new work, which is now lowering emissions, and making sure that we, as I said, I'm insistent on it, that everybody is carried along with us.
Minister, you raised the fact that obviously when it comes to any type of infrastructure, there's consideration, well, many projects outside of infrastructure, energy, and natural resources, but certainly in those domains that will often require and often will be benefited from engagement with Indigenous people. So how do you also balance that? Because there's obviously from time to time opposition, but from time to time, there's also support for some of these projects with coming and stemming from Indigenous communities. So how do you ensure that we, as a country, advance Indigenous reconciliation and are still able to advance projects like these?
First of all, understand that, there is no broad, sweeping, singular Indigenous agenda in this country. I mean, where I grew up in Labrador, and, to tell you a little story, Brian, I mean, when I moved there, when my father got a job in Happy Valley, Goose Bay, Labrador, I was 13 years old, literally got off the ferry from Lewisport to Goose Bay. And the first people I met were Innu leadership, who my father knew. And I remember that very clearly because I had never met an Indigenous person before. I mean, I joke that it's not the case anymore, but growing up here in St. John's in the 70s and early 80s, my idea of diversity was Protestants, which was fairly serious at the time. We've graduated well beyond that now, and we've got a very vibrant immigrant community here now. But it was meeting them changed my life because shortly afterwards, Dad drove me to the community of Sheshachit where they lived, and it was not the same as where I lived by any means, and that left a deep imprint on me. My undergraduate was in political mobilization against economic development that the Innu didn't want. And when I came back and I worked for the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, I was just reflecting in a meeting that I had with Inuit leadership just a moment ago that, it was 29 years ago I sat at my first table negotiating with Inuit in Labrador. I went away, did my master's dissertation in Indigenous participation in natural resource development. So I feel very at home in this place. It means a lot to me. The Inuit and Innu of Labrador alone have different priorities. They're different people and who belong to different lands in some respects. And the same applies to Indigenous communities right across this country, to First Nations, Inuit, Métis. So you have to sit with them as they are. You have to listen to them. And the only way that we're going to get development done in this country is if we do it together. If you don't agree with that, I've got a whole lot of jurisprudence that I could put in front of you. Because why we have gone to the lengths that we have to try to get the environmental assessment processes in this country. Because they, up until fairly recently, the idea of reconciliation for some proponents was, and for government was to, backs off a list of check boxes to a community. And if you don't hear back from them, assume that they go along with it. You can say, hey, we consulted. It's not good enough. We know that. The good news is that, with TMX in this country, it was tried and tested, and we did not get it right, and we did not get it right. And then we kept at it. And then the Federal Court of Appeal came back in a unanimous decision and said, yeah, we think you got it pretty much right. So now we've got a playbook, and that playbook is working at table. You have some communities that do not want, let's say, oil and gas development. And I can tell you, as a former Minister of Indigenous Services who has spoken to, all the chiefs of the Assembly of First Nations, they do not agree by any means on let's say, oil and gas development. There are certain nations and Métis communities in Alberta that are very gung-ho about it and see it developing on their terms. And there are others that won't. And, you have to deal and work with all of them, not just industry, but governments. And that is how it works in this country. The good news is that when you take those extra steps on consultation in the beginning, you are more sure of the outcome and you are more sure of the timeline. We've built the timeline in the Impact Assessment Act. We've built it so it is sure, so that we are reducing, let's say, court interventions. That we've done everything that we can to court-proof it so that there are no surprises, because that is one surefire way to dissuade investment. So it's taken a lot of work, and but it is so important that we get this right. It is so important to natural resource development in this country to get this right, and we think we're that much closer to it.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you for sharing the stories of when you were younger. It's obviously always great to hear sort of how one is having their horizons broadened. So we have a few questions, Minister, from the crowd, if that's okay.
Please.
I'm sure you're used to question periods, so all good. The first one that we have here, given that the most vulnerable are the ones that suffer the most in times like this, and the coming climate change, labor changes, and energy change requirements, if the government isn't going to adopt a basic income, so obviously this audience member would think that would be something to consider, but is of the view that it won't be adopted, what safeguards are going to be built in so that poverty is eliminated and all Canadians can feel safe about their future?
Yeah, that is a really, really good question, and I don't have a surefire answer for it. I think that a lot of us have really reflected and continue to reflect on the supports that we have put in place during the course of this pandemic. And I think we're still kind of trying to process the effects that it's had. I mean, these supports have not been cheap. They have been extremely expensive, but absolutely, don't get me wrong, the right thing to do. You know, as the Prime Minister said time and again, the virus and the lockdown, it's beyond us. It's what we need to do without question. And who should bear the cost of that? Well, government is best situated to do that. Giving our buying power, our borrowing power, given you know interest rates, we are best able to do that rather than you know what someone's going to give. Are you going to impose those costs on individuals and businesses? No, I mean that's obviously not the country that we are. We said at the very beginning that we were putting these in place, knowing that we may not get it right or perfect, but it was important to get it out as quickly as we could so that people stayed in place, that people you know did what public health and what we needed them to do, that businesses did what they needed to do, that people were employed. Obviously, you know, it has had a tremendous effect. I think, you know, the basic income is something that is being debated this weekend at the Liberal convention. And, you know, there's a certain attraction to it that, you know, you think, well, you've got this myriad of programs. Why don't you just, you know, put them together, get rid of a lot of the red tape, and maybe then we'll end up with a basic income. I don't think it's as simple as that, but it's certainly very beguiling. And it is something we got to look at. I do agree with the premise of the question. It is something that I think about all the time, is the amount of anxiety that people have to go through. Anxiety is an awful thing. I've suffered from it myself. It's particularly odious when it leads to depression. I don't want anybody to go through that unnecessarily. I want people to feel that they are secure, that they are looked after, that they are part of this economy. It's a tall order, but it drives me. And so I hear you loud and clear. I think that we need to, you know, look at it extremely carefully, but we need to look at it.
Thank you, Minister. And there's certainly, with the pandemic and all the other moving pieces that are maybe put on display or exacerbated by the pandemic, I'm sure anxiety is certainly something that many Canadians are feeling. So it's nice to hear you acknowledge that. Next question. This audience member sort of signaled out the Alberta government, but then also puts in all provincial governments. So what can all provincial governments, with Alberta being maybe the focus for this audience member, do in helping Canada get to net zero?
Number one, and you know, as a former Premier, Brian, you know this. I mean, when you can work together, it saves a whole lot of time. It allows you to be more productive. We only have, each of us, so much bandwidth. You know, we still need to sleep and eat, look after our kids, and do other things. So if you're spending time, you know, with a lot of politics, that is less time that you're spending on dealing with the real issues. That's how I go about it. My tenure as Natural Resources Minister, and you think about coming out of the 2019 election, which was, you know, the big issues were environment and economy. They were the ones that were dividing, and energy particularly, I should say. And that was what, you know, it was reflected in the results, especially for the Liberal Party in Saskatchewan and in Alberta. And I literally just been sworn in and got a text. A mutual friend had given her my number from Minister Sonia Savage in Edmonton, and she texted me saying, "When are you coming to Alberta? Congratulations. When are you coming to Alberta?" And I texted her back and said, "How's tomorrow?" And I flew in the next day after our first cabinet meeting. I was still in Rideau Hall. I hadn't even appeared in front of the media yet. And that kind of set the tone for my relationship with her. And it has been a very productive relationship. We have seen each other through thick and thin and through a lot of tumult over the course of the past year. It's not a good narrative. It doesn't get talked about an awful lot, cooperation and getting along and getting things done. But I think it's important that, you know, people who are listening to this conversation know that conflict does make the headlines. I know that, former journalist. But the working together is happening. This is bigger than each of us. I think provincial governments in this country, I know that, understand that. I have very good relationships with all my colleagues, my provincial colleagues. And it's important that I do, because natural resources are provincial jurisdiction primarily. First lesson I learned from Minister Savage once I landed, let me tell you, that was ingrained. But it's something that we know here in Newfoundland too, with the Atlantic Accord, with the sheer jurisdiction that we have over oil and gas because it's offshore. You know, we signed the Atlantic Accord, John Crosby did back in the day, and Brian Mulroney. So, you know, I get that. So all the more reason why we need to work together and coordinate. We are still a population of some 38 million people. You know, we are still, you know, the same as California. So when you're dealing with the United States, it's to our competitive advantage to work together. It worked in the negotiations on the NAFTA 2.0, COSMA, whatever you want to, whatever it's, you know, called, but we all know what I'm talking about. That was difficult, and we knew that it was going to be difficult with the Trump administration. But we come out of it in pretty good shape, and we did that because everybody worked together. Everybody had clear viewed understanding of the challenge we faced at that negotiating table, and I think the same exists now. It really shook people up. To not only have the pandemic lockdown occur, but then, you know, the subsequent demand destruction, nobody flying, nobody driving. Looking down at, I've got an app called Oil Price here on my phone, and looking down at it and seeing negative $35 barrel oil and thinking that obviously it was a glitch. It wasn't. And for, you know, for that to occur at the same time as the price war, you know, with OPEC, Russia, I mean, it is very much the mainstay of our economy. And look, and I'll say this too, just to add, we have often heard the phrase hewers of wood and drawers of water, like it's a negative thing. These are some of the most high-tech, highest-paying jobs in the country. Our natural resource workers, whether it be mining, forestry, oil and gas, geothermal, you know, and now we're increasingly getting into renewables. We need everybody on board, but, you know, and for anybody who's looking for a new vocation or a new profession in life, I heartily recommend the natural resource sector. You know, it is cutting edge, and we are really good at it in this country. We really are, and the world looks up to us. I mean, talking about those meetings, like I from this boardroom, you know, I attend G20 meetings, International Energy Agency meetings, all those great meetings I would have attended in person. And we're all sophisticated enough with Zoom that we know, you know, gallery view, you know, it's nice when you make the first page. Right? I'm always first page, and it's not me. It's because I'm the Minister of Natural Resources of the fourth biggest producer of oil and gas of a tier 1 nuclear nation, of a primary supplier of critical minerals to the world that we'll need for EVs, you know, lithium, for instance. We just announced our critical minerals list, actually, 31 of them that we know that we can supply to the world, that we're competitive. And that's how the world sees us. And that is a very good thing because we're good at it.
Very inspiring, Minister. If it's okay, because I know we're arriving on time, we have 3 more questions, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can raise your hand like you had to do with the Prime Minister if you have to step away. But
no, good.
But yeah, 3 more, and they're great questions. So certainly want to give them their due. One thing that you mentioned that I would just quickly like to explore, the jurisdictional question, which we have over the last few weeks seen some movement there with the Supreme Court of Canada's ruling with regards to the federal government's ability to put a price on carbon pollution, and obviously with the idea that many would argue energy, natural resources is just supposed to be the provinces. What was your reaction to that important case, and what would you say to anybody listening that may sort of question the jurisdictional aspect of what the federal government does in energy and natural resources in general, or with regards to climate change?
My initial reaction, the first tweet that I put out was, let's move on. I think that a price on pollution shouldn't be free. I mean, come on, you know, our grandchildren are going to look back on this and say, how ridiculous is this? You know, it should not be free. You shouldn't be able to just pollute in the commons and not pay a price. Just doesn't make any sense. How do you? We have to lower emissions. We have to, and we're committed to doing it. Our biggest competitor, friend, and ally is now doubling down on. What is the best way to go about it? Again, I am a big believer in the marketplace, and my faith has been restored in the course of the past year, because when I see how quickly things are moving on reducing emissions and embracing, you know, the fight against climate change. And it is awe-inspiring to watch it work. How do you incent the marketplace? You put a price on something. You know, to me, it just makes sense. I don't know, how else does government do that without kind of getting into the weeds with some regulations? Perhaps you got to be changing all the time. I don't know. I know what our plan is. Our plan was to put a price on pollution. It was affirmed by the Supreme Court. You know, if you look at the judgments, you know, there's an acknowledgement of exactly that, the jurisdictional issue, but there's also an acknowledgement of the challenges that we face. And there was also an acknowledgement of how we went about it, right? We went to the provinces, and as is the case now, and said, you determine how we do this. The wants, needs, New Brunswick are different from Newfoundland and Labrador, are different than Alberta, are different than Ontario or British Columbia. And therefore the provinces should determine, how do you reach those goals? What's the most effective way for you? But if you don't do it, well, we have a backstop, you know, and that backstop is something that, you know, the federal government will put into place. And you know, 90% of people will not be out of pocket because of this. You know, that is tremendously important. You get the money back, but it incents, you'll get to keep more money, you know, with those incentives in place, because you're not going to pay for things that are now slightly more expensive, because we have to take into account the pollution that's accrued from those purchases. So it incents the behavior that we need. It works with the market, not against it. It embraces market principles. It is not an intrusion upon it. It is it's an embrace of it. And that's why it makes sense to me, and why it makes sense to a lot of other jurisdictions around the world. So, you know, that's my argument on that. I think let's move on.
Well said. This is a bit of it's a question, but I think it's a bit more of a suggestion. It's an interesting one. Transportation GHG. In the 1970s, the energy crisis, highway speed limits were lowered to reduce oil consumption during the energy crisis. I think that's the point. Why is nobody discussing this strategy to reduce CO2 output today? So a bit of a suggestion there. Be pleased for you to react.
Not a bad suggestion. It's like, you know, it's difficult enough to get people to slow down. Everybody hates the government that's going to tell people to, you know, but anyway, that is an excellent point. I'm glad you raised it. Thank you for that. I mean, I think that the more effective, and I wouldn't even call it a medium or long-term play, but actually a short-term play, is EVs. I think, you know, EVs and potentially hydrogen for 18-wheelers, for maritime shipping, and potentially for aviation. You know, those hydrogen plays may be a little further down. Again, we got to make those investments now and start thinking about that now. And we released our national hydrogen plan in December. But in the short, medium term, it's EVs. It's happening. You know, record numbers of EVs sold in British Columbia over the course of the past year, for instance. BC tends to lead on these things. I always keep an eye on British Columbia. You know, they brought in a carbon tax very early on. And you know, and it's worked out, and it was the inspiration for what we did nationally. But you know, EVs and hydrogen, I think, are going to be effective. It's far better that, you know, we can bring this closer to zero emissions. But I'm very open-minded. Again, I'm a practical guy, so, you know.
Some practical advice.
Yes, it is very practical. I like it.
And the last one, Minister, can you please elaborate on what steps Canada is currently taking in supporting the CO2 technology companies? Those Canadian companies may be on the cutting edge of capturing and using the existing CO2 gases that are already in our atmosphere.
Yeah. You know, again, I was really inspired when I went to Globe, and you know, I think amongst the many companies that I met there, big and small, but a lot of them small, was Carbon Engineering, which is out of the Lower Mainland, BC. They are actually extracting carbon from the air. I don't know, it's hard to put your head around, but they, you know, Bill Gates is looking at it. So, you know, that's kind of a seal of approval. We're blessed with the fact that we have a Minister of the Environment and Climate Change who is from that community, who's been president, CEO of various clean tech companies. He understands how they operate, and he understands how pivotal they could be. And look, in any projection, when you look at how we're going to reach our 2050 goals, a lot of it was probably through technologies that we don't know or understand. I can't bank on that now. I need to deal with what we have now, what I know now. But we are making significant investments in clean tech, and you know, watch the budget, because you know how things go. Premier, your ministers are always giving you proposals. Ultimately, you and the Minister of Finance make that decision. You know, certainly it's an area that I think, you know, we all agree. It's something that we want to see grow in this country. You know, we want our natural resources companies fund clean tech significantly, but you know, government could play a bigger role. I would like, you know, I want to see what we can do with carbon capture and sequestration. You know, I want to see what we can do with companies like Carbon Engineering. We have to make sure that we have the right tax incentives in place to make sure that we keep those companies in Canada. I want to keep them in Canada and export from this country. Again, you know, even under the Trump administration, the Americans are very competitive in this space, as are the Europeans. So, you know, we have to make sure that we incent these companies to stay. It is absolutely top of mind.
Well, the federal government investing in clean tech is certainly a way to build back better, as often is said, and to help the rebuilding of the Canadian economy. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre. C'est grandement apprécié. Thank you to everybody listening. Sorry that we went a little over, but once we were able to sort of get into the thick of things, we certainly wanted to hear from the Minister and obviously hear the responses to your questions. A quick reminder again, there's an event tonight, 7 p.m. Eastern, an all-party panel, and there'll be other events over the next 2 weeks. You can check that out at thepearsoncentre.ca. On that note, encore une fois, un grand merci à vous tous et toutes. Thank you, Minister, for your time, and thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you all. Thank you for your patience. Thank you.
Until next time, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.